The J.Q. Thompson Home. In 1890, Mr. and Mrs. John Quincy Thompson, early settlers in this area, built their dream house, a large two-story home at the top of the hill, majestically looking over the countryside and the fledgling new railroad town that was being called New Troy. Thompson had been an influential member of the area, helping found the first school down the hill from his farm, and helping negotiate the name change of Elm Creek, located 2½ miles to the northwest, to Troy, because of confusion at the post office between Elm Creek and Alum Creek. The house soon became known as the House of Eight Gables, because of its beautiful porches. The Thompsons lived in the house until their death, and it was then occupied by his son, QW, and his family. When QW and his wife had passed, it became a rent house for a while. The next and current tenants were his great-granddaughter, Lynn Thompson McMurtry, and her husband Mike. They began the long arduous task of restoring the mansion to its former glory. In 2003 the major remodel began in earnest. The house was kept to its original layout as much as possible, with one change being the small room addition on the north side being removed and replaced with a modern kitchen and entry area. This change meant the loss of the north side's upper porch. The restoration came to a close in 2006, with the refurbished house once again beaming like a beacon to the community. Other improvements followed off and on, specifically involving the repair of some of the porches and columns. Currently the house has the following: 13 rooms, 7 porches, 11 exterior doors, and 38 windows.
Troy Church of Christ. Around 1928, area parishioners of the Church of Christ were meeting in private residences. In 1933, after interest in building a church took root, a new sanctuary was constructed at the intersection of Bell Street and Highway 81, South Central Avenue today. Around 1953, a residence directly to the east of the church was converted to a fellowship hall and joined to the sanctuary via an awning. The interstate highway expansion in 2013 necessitated tearing down of the church, and soon after, a parcel of land was given to the church by Lee Mays behind the intersection of Aikman Drive and Wendler Lane. The new church sanctuary, fellowship hall, and classrooms are being utilized there today.
First Baptist Church. The Baptist Church in Troy was formally organized on May 10, 1890 with 54 people signing a document. In May 1890 a presbytery was formed led by St. Clair Lawrence, Reed Rector, and W.R. Maxwell, pastor of First Baptist Church of Temple. The church was to bear the name Troy Missionary Baptist Church of Christ. In the fall of 1891 a sanctuary was constructed on a lot near the intersection of then Highway 81 and Bell Street. By 1923 additional space was needed. In 1949 plans were being made to build the new interstate highway which would pass through where the church stood. By 1951 the building was moved to a location on Church Street, just west of the Christian Church, on a lot donated by William O'Magen. The first services in the new location were held in September of 1951. By 1959 a new educational building had been added, and in 1960, a new parsonage. In the early 1980s, plans were in the works for a new educational building and an eventual new sanctuary. By 1984, thanks to a successful Together We Build campaign, an educational building was built freestanding to the south and rear of the church sanctuary. In January 1989, ground was broken for a new 440-seat sanctuary to replace the original aging structure from 1891. The dedication was on September 10, 1989 at a cost of $580,000. The original sanctuary was torn down in the summer of 1989 at the age of 98.
Troy Christian Church. The Troy Christian Church was organized in December of 1886. Trustees M.C. Elliott, S.N. Strange and Clay Rice purchased Lot 7 Block 10 from the Katy Railroad at the price of $1. In 1887, an adjoining lot was purchased for $25. The church and tabernacle were erected facing east, the location being to the east of today's Church Avenue, right across the street from the current First Baptist Church. In 1925 the building was remodeled and turned to face south, and the steeple was removed. 8 classrooms were also added under the administration of Reverend C.J. Pierce, the pastor at that time. Declining membership, relocations, and deaths caused the church to be disbanded. In 1986 the church building was again sold and demolished to make room for the Bank of Troy. In 2013, the bank building, now Extraco Bank, was demolished to make room for IH-35 expansion. Today, southbound Central Avenue, the interstate access road, runs through the property.
Troy United Methodist Church. Several years before there was a Methodist church built in Troy, the church was known as the Troy Circuit of the Waco District. The pastor resided in Troy and served churches at Shiloh, Pendleton, Oweenaville, and the communities of Pleasant View and Childers. In 1897, several lots were purchased at the intersection of Church Avenue and Austin Street for a church. The Circuit Board also authorized the sale of the property at Pleasant View with the proceeds to be used for the new church in Troy. The building was completed in 1900 under the pastorate of Reverend George Clark. In 1905, Troy shared a pastorate with Pendleton, with Reverend D.C. Ellis as resident pastor. It was not until 1947 that Troy became a full-time church. When the Pendleton church disbanded, most members became active in Troy. In 1952 a building was purchased and moved to the grounds to be used as Sunday school classrooms. By 1966 the Cedar Creek Church had disbanded and its building was moved to Troy for use as a fellowship hall. In 1967 the sanctuary was remodeled, and in 1975 a new educational building was completed. In 2010, the expansion of I-35 required the land, so we prepared to move. In June of 2011, we tearfully left the original 111-year-old building and temporarily moved to a vacant building at the old Troy School property. A new 12,580 square foot facility was constructed on FM 935, capable of expansion. Several items from the 1900 building were incorporated into the new building for historical purposes. The new church building was ready for worship in June of 2013, and our attendance and participation has exploded. After completing a capital campaign in 2016, we broke ground in February of 2017 for a ministry activity center, gymnasium, a classroom wing, storage, and additional restrooms that has since opened as of this date.
Grant Chapel Missionary Baptist Church. In the mid-1940s, a group of mission-minded sisters led by Sister Katie Johnson started a Sunday school in the Troy Schoolhouse. They soon employed Reverend Lonnie Grant to preach, and this mission became so inspiring that they convinced Reverend Grant to organize a church. Along with the Troy congregants and some from the 8th Street Baptist Church in Temple, the Grant Chapel Missionary Baptist Church was formed on the second Sunday of February, 1945. In 1954 a building program was started and soon a sanctuary was completed out on the old Waco Road, just north of Troy. An addition was built onto the chapel in 1979. The church joined the Bell Baptist Association in the early 2000s. Soon the church sanctuary was beginning to show its age and land was purchased for a new sanctuary. Shortly thereafter the old building was abandoned and a new church building was built on North Central Avenue in Troy. The congregation still worships there to this date.
Troy First Assembly of God. The Troy First Assembly of God was organized in the 1980s and a small sanctuary was built on what was then Luther Curtis Road, now West Main Street. It was just to the west of the Wendler Youth Baseball Field. The building soon became too small as the congregation increased to over 100 members. In the late 1990s, a new 300-plus seat sanctuary was built just to the west of the old building, along with a kitchen, nursery, education wing, and church offices. As of 2020, the congregation continues to grow and they look forward to serving the community along with possible expansion in the future.
Grace Baptist Church. The Grace Baptist Church was organized in 1981, and a sanctuary was built just south of Troy on J Line Road with Donald Lentz as the pastor. 40 years later, Lent still preaches the gospel at Grace, and the church offers many outreach opportunities.
Troy School. In 1879, Mr. and Mrs. Owen Carpenter deeded to trustees J. H. Porter, D. N. Smith and J. Q. Thompson, for the consideration of $3, a 1-acre tract of land situated on Kings Branch Creek, located 2½ miles southeast of the town of Elm Creek, which would soon be renamed Troy. A 1-room 18 by 20-foot school building was constructed and it became known as the Kings Branch Free School. By 1882, the Katy Railroad had been built near the property and the rapid exodus of people from Elm Creek to the new railroad site necessitated that a new larger 30 by 50-foot building be built. This school was an unranked school and pupils were ranked by whatever reader they could read most fluently. This building and its $700 worth of furnishings was destroyed by a tornado in 1885. As 1886 rolled around, enough money had been raised to construct a new school. Once again Mr. and Mrs. Owen S. Carpenter deeded to the trustees J. Q. Thompson, Milton Bunner, and Owen S. Carpenter a 2.66 plot of land to be used exclusively for school purposes, or it and all of its improvements would revert back to the benefactors, their heirs or assigns. A 2-story building was constructed with the help of the Masonic organization and the Shiloh Grange, who would both retain the rise for meeting purposes on the 2nd floor. By this time, most of the population of Troy, formerly Elm Creek, had moved to the new railroad site near Kings Branch. For the second time in as many years, J. Q. Thompson and Tommy Elliott wrote the Postal Department for permission of the new railroad town to become known as Troy, and it was granted. For a while the new and old towns existed independently as Old and New Troy, even with Old Troy holding on to continuing to operate its own school. But in time, Old Troy faded away into a ghost town. After New Troy became just Troy in its own right, the King Branch School District No. 29 became Troy Independent School District No. 68. By 1912 it was necessary to vote bonds of $20,000 to replace the very inadequate two-story wooden building with a three-story brick structure that was ready for the first pupils in September of 1912. The early 1920s saw the addition of an elevator to accommodate Miss Carleen Gunn, a polio survivor confined to a wheelchair. The elevator was built by her father and it would make the Troy School one of the first in the area to have handicapped facilities. Miss Gunn would soon go on to become one of Troy's most beloved teachers, and the next school would also incorporate handicap ramps. A large gymnasium was built in 1941 just to the west of the school building, allowing for indoor basketball and other activities. A catalog advertising the school described reasons for Troy being a school second to none compared to schools in larger places. It boasted Troy as being within a few miles of the geographical center of the state, its freedom from malaria and chills, and its having one of the finest artesian wells in the state. As reasons to choose Troy, the catalog also promoted the school's library, laboratory, and large auditorium and stage. By the late 1950s the three-story building became inadequate and bonds were raised to build a one-story brick campus. When the campus was completed, it surrounded the three-story building to the north and south. The gymnasium remained to the west. In 1954 the three-story building was demolished, leaving only the new campus. In the early 70s a new gym was built just to the northwest of the campus. During construction of the 1954 school, the junior high students were bused to Pendleton to use classrooms there. Attendance at Troy School once again began to rapidly rise. Upcoming changes to the campus would soon be necessary. The mid-80s saw another change in the campus when a new elementary campus was built out on East Austin Avenue. The school would be named Troy Elementary, consisting of a kindergarten through 4th grade. The 5th and 6th would remain at the old campus along with the middle school and high school. In 1989 a new high school was constructed, out on the old Waco Road and West Main Street. The first graduating class walked down the aisle in 1990, with the middle and intermediate school remaining at the old campus, which was renamed Troy Middle School. By 2000, the need for a second elementary school was fulfilled with the approval of bonds, and land being donated by Lee Mays, out on Luther Curtis Road, which would soon become West Main Street. The school was named Edna Bigham Mays Elementary, after Mr. Mays's mother, a 1915 Troy graduate, and opened in 2001. Not long after, a new middle school was constructed just to the west of the new elementary. It took the name of Raymond Mays Middle School, opening in the spring of 2010. Troy Middle School was abandoned and students moved to the new campus. In 2016 the 1954 campus was demolished, leaving only the new gym, to be used as a warehouse and meeting area, the football field, used as a youth football and cheer league, and another metal building for storage.
Long before what we call Troy today came about, there was a settlement 2½ miles to the northeast on Big Elm Creek, known as Elm Creek. Around 1850, Robert Childers built a mill and soon a stage stop stand for horses to be exchanged coming up the old Chisholm Trail route on the Austin to Waco Road and crossing Big Elm Creek. Childers was soon joined by Horace Haldeman, a military man from Fort Gates, who established a large horse ranch. A post office was begun and the town grew as the stage rolled through town carrying passengers and mail. Elm Creek flourished and soon the Elliott family began running the stage stop and hotel. Life was good out at Elm Creek, as the townsfolk pronounced it. Prosperity continued and the town was largely unaffected by the Civil War. By around the late 1870s a problem with mail delivery occurred because of the local pronunciation of the town's name. Elm Creek as it was called became mixed up with Alum Creek, another town in Bastrop County. It was decided to change the town's name and in 1875, J.Q. Thompson, Asa and Tommy Elliott wrote to the Postal Department requesting that the town be renamed Troy, a name suggested by a resident, probably after Troy, New York. The request was granted and in 1876, Elm Creek officially became Troy. Life went back to normal, but just as ancient Troy's fate was altered by a wooden horse, our Troy's fate would be sealed by an iron horse. As the 1870s came to a close, the first whispers of a railroad began to surface. In 1881, while rounding up cattle, Bob Curtis met a surveyor looking for a suitable route for the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad. Bob suggested his Uncle Owen Carpenter's farm out on Kings Branch Creek might be a good place, and in 1882, Mr. Carpenter gave the railroad a right-of-way through his property and the land for a railroad depot and town. By 1883 residents at Troy flocked to the new railroad town, which would have been named Carpenter if the name had not already been taken. The exodus from Troy continued to the new railroad town which still had not been named. So many Troy residents moved that the two towns began to be known as New Troy and Old Troy. By 1882 the post office needed an official name, so once again, J.Q. Thompson and Tommy Elliott wrote the post office department, suggesting that the town take over the name of Troy. The request was granted. Still, out at the old Troy site, some stalwarts refused to move, stubbornly refusing to accept the inevitable. Old Troy even had a school that continued to operate. As the 20th century rolled around, Old Troy slipped into almost obscurity, as Troy, formerly New Troy, forged ahead into the future. If you want to visit Old Troy/Elm Creek, drive north on the old Waco Road past Troy High School and turn left after crossing Big Elm Creek.